love that of the two of us, you had the one. Nice. You're gonna, yeah. The secret door. Yes, and there's a garden, yes.
Well, long after, I think our sound, am I? Nope. False alarm, hang on. Okay, is that better? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. Long after he had grown up into an adult, we read about the story of Joseph in this week's Torah portion. And in a moment when he had been on a long life journey, carrying with him the history of his community, his family, he finds himself at a moment later in life with an opportunity to re-embrace that part of his community. Many of us know the story of Joseph. He's sold into slavery after his brothers throw him in a pit. And he's confronted by those brothers again. And the story very easily could have been that his brothers came, stood before him, and they didn't recognize him. And that he decided not to reveal who he was. But instead, he makes a choice. He decides, this is my family. This is who I am. In fact, in this Torah portion, he says, I am Joseph, your brother. So too, this afternoon, do we have 7 adult learners in our community who are reaffirming that connection to our shared community and tradition. They stand before us like Joseph, celebrating what is theirs. And so I'd like to welcome everyone Welcome everyone who is here in our sanctuary, and welcome to everyone who is joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. You'll find a slightly higher quality stream at tilb.org. At the top of the screen, you can click the live stream link where you'll find that slightly higher stream. And I mention this also because as we draw closer to the end of our service, we'll offer the opportunity for the mourner's Kaddish, and if there are names of people that you are thinking of, you can offer those names in that chat. For those of us who are online now, I invite us to say Shabbat Shalom and Mazel Tov as we begin this celebration together. And of course, I would like to as well welcome those who lifted up our learners this afternoon, and so a special welcome to Jan Liss, one of their teachers, as well as, and let me introduce you, this is Rabbi Michal Loving over here. There's a little bit of a joke. So this is, their teachers are Jan Liss and Michal Loving, not just a profound and powerful duo, but they happen to be related as well. Welcome, Rabbi Loving. Welcome, Jan. It is a joy to celebrate with the two of you as we all celebrate the teaching and learning that you have offered these adults. I want to say welcome as well to David York. It is always such a joy to have your music leading with us, bringing us into prayer, into song. Thank you for offering your music to us this afternoon. And welcome as well to Bill Shafton offering his music for us. With the two of you, I hope you will forgive me for offering the image of wings again, that it feels as though we are carried on those angels' wings. Thank you both for offering your music this afternoon. And a little bit of housekeeping. So, if anybody has come here and brought a cell phone this afternoon, I just want to offer a gentle reminder for us to turn our cell phones onto silent, or I am actually going to turn mine completely off right now so that we can have this afternoon without that particular distraction. I want to mention also that we have, as per Los Angeles County Health Guidelines, we are asking that we all remain masked throughout our service, and that is, of course, masked over our mouths as well as our noses. And I am sure that many of us are sitting here and saying that is all fine and good, that's great, but there are two people standing in front of us who don't have a mask on. And that is because Cantor Cooper and I very recently both took a COVID test and tested negative. And so we are removing our mask, but when we are schmoozing, when we're with everyone, we'll place our mask back on. You'll notice also that our adult B'nai Mitzvah also will not be wearing masks when they're up here. That is because they also very, very recently took COVID tests as well and tested negative, of course. We'll be hearing throughout our service their voices. It's not enough simply to read the words of our tradition. It has to come alive for us in order for it to be something that we celebrate, something that survives from generation to generation. And so they will be offering, woven throughout our service, their divrei Torah, literally their words of Torah, what they learn from these texts and how we can learn from them as well. And you'll also find, if anybody had the chance on the way in to grab a handout, the handout has, thank you, Jay, the handout has an explanation of many of the prayers and rituals that we'll be celebrating together this afternoon. And so if that can be helpful, I invite us to use that handout as a way to follow along in the service. Still further, there is a special prayer book that we use for this service. And you'll find on each of the pages, I'll keep your page, on each of the pages, a different set of things. So first, on the right-hand side of the page, you'll find the Hebrew for all of the prayers that we'll be offering together this afternoon. And on the left-hand side, a transliteration of those same words. But you'll find also English readings, interpretive readings on the opposite page, as well as commentary below. We know that sometimes during services, the thing that we are joined together in is not what's speaking to us directly in that moment. And so if and as our hearts wander, I invite us to let our eyes wander around the page as well. All of these are invitations into a sacred moment together. And for some of us, it's going to be meaningful to sing along to the Hebrew, and you'll find those words in the prayer book. We'll have the page numbers read aloud as well. For others, it'll be humming or singing along to the melody, and for still others, it'll be simply letting those melodies wash over us. For all of us, I invite us to let this prayer experience be whatever it is we need it to be. And so together we are celebrating as these 7 adults take on this tradition that we share. We are celebrating from far and wide as we join together this afternoon. And so too do we invoke the words and the image of the prophet Balaam, who stood in front of the community and said, Ma Tovu. What a wondrous collection of people. All of our voices join together, and so in reflection of those words, Ma Tovu, we sing those very same. I invite us to turn to page 74 as we begin our service this afternoon. Well, when asked what the entirety of the Jewish tradition boils down to, Rabbi Hillel said, quite simply, what is hateful to you, do not do to another. He draws this from a prayer in our tradition that invites us to show love for one another. Perhaps higher than any other ideal, any other goal that we have together is to share that love with one another. And of course, Rabbi Hillel recognized that it's not so simple, right? There are a lot of details that go into actually sharing our love for one another. When the rubber meets the road, it gets quite complicated. So too, do we take this same idea and with a myriad of fringes place them on the corners of our garments from that same prayer that invites us to love one another? We remind ourselves that there are a myriad of ways to do so. And so it is an absolute joy this afternoon to call up our B'nai Mitzvah class as they place these fringes around their shoulders, knowing that with love they place these garments on their shoulders, and the invitation, the history of their learning, and the future of their continuing to learn all of the many ways to show this love to everyone in our community and world. And so I'd like now to invite each of our adult B'nai Mitzvah to stand up to find the place in our sanctuary where they are going to receive their talit, and for those presenting to join us as well. Well, I invite, while we're still standing, for us to offer this blessing all together. As a gentle reminder for all of us, the last words are Lehitatef batzitzit. Let's join together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, lehitatef batzitzit. Amen.
We continue our service on page 85. I am a Jew because the faith of Israel demands no abdication of my mind. I am a Jew because the faith of Israel requires all the devotion of my heart. I am a Jew because in every place where suffering weeps, the Jew weeps. I am a Jew because at every time when despair cries out, the Jew hopes. I am a Jew because the word of Israel is the oldest and the newest. I am a Jew because Israel's promise is the universal promise. I am a Jew because for Israel, the world is not completed. We are completing it. I am a Jew because for Israel, humanity is not created. We are creating it. I am a Jew because Israel places humanity and its unity above the nations and above Israel itself. I am a Jew because above humanity, image of the divine unity, Israel places the unity in which is divine.
We continue our service on page 108. Please rise in body or in spirit. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Please be seated. A little later on, during the service, I will read my Torah portion in Hebrew. This text talked to me very directly because Judah comes to plead with his brother, whom he doesn't know is his brother, and therefore he addresses a figure of authority, a figure of power, and he does it in the name of his father, for the love of his father. This touched me because I do believe that at some point in our lives, when our parents get old, we become responsible for them. There is a role reversal. I would say a well-deserved role rehearsal. And I want to say, lucky are those of you who live by your parents and who can take care of them. That was not my case. I had to come here, and therefore, this, what I would call duty, I was not able to do it. This will always remain a deep wound inside of me. Of course, I was going back every year to take care of them for a very short time because my children had to stay here. They were young. And so for that time, very short, I could do what probably most of you do every day. That is, run from one hospital to the next, one doctor to the next, one social service to the next. And therefore, to see Judah advocating for his father just touched me very much. I think also what touched me is to see Judah advocate for his father, and it is, we probably see him in front of our eyes develop the qualities that are required when we advocate for someone, especially when you don't do it well for yourself. And you have to get out of your own self to ask, to request, to demand. And I think we see him become a leader just in front of our eyes. The other thing that struck me in this portion is, of course, seeing two brothers who, in spite of their love, are still at odds with each other. And everyone knows that there are difficulties sometimes inherent to being a family. And sometimes, as we see in this Torah portion, members of a family hurt each other. In this Torah portion, I cannot say without wanting to, but in our lives, often without wanting to. And then what do? Do you forgive? Do you forget? Does love overcome, or should love overcome all this? And the question remains. There is a very famous author in France, his name is Jean Cocteau, who died in 1964, who was a playwright, who also wrote a lot for not only theater, but ballets, movies. Some of you, my generation, may have seen his movies. And he said a sentence that became, of course, instantaneously famous. Family, I hate you. I do not know what happened in his life, but this sentence, which is probably a shortcut, maybe a lapidary shortcut, just hides the fact that, in fact, that's all we have, family. I just would like to finish on the following note. I want to thank all my friends here, because if we do not choose our own genetic families, we do choose our friends, and you have become and are my only family here. Thank you for everything that you bring to me. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher kitshanu, yotzer or uvarei hoshek, osei shalom uvarei et hakol, ha'meir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha barahamim, uvtuvo mihadesh, bahol yom tamid, Ma'aseh verashit, Ma'avrabu ma'asecha Adonai, Kulam b'chok ma'asita, Mal'ah ha'aretz kinyanecha, Tit barak Adonai Eloheinu, Al sheva ma'aseh yadecha, Ba'al ma'orei or, She'asita yafa aruha selah, or hadash, Al Tzion Ta'ir, V'niskei hulanu, Mehera la'oro, Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer Hamarot. You are praised who rolls out the rough, raw clay of the universe into delicate vessels of light and from nothing at all. We could perceive in a world that has turned old, a shimmering new creation right before our eyes, made this moment just for us. How much of life reveals your presence? How much Torah unfolds from each new flower, from each new wave that breaks upon the sea? You are praised who forms from the clay that cloaks our lives, the delicate vessels which contain our light. Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer Hamarot. We continue on page 112. Ahava Rabbah Ahavtanu Adonai Eloheinu, Chemla Gedolah V'Teirah Hamalta Aleinu, Ba'avor Avotenu Imototenu, Shavatu V'ha Vatlamdam, Hukei Haim, Kain Tihonenu, Utlamdenu.
והארננו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש, ולא נקלם, ולא ניכשל לעולם ועד. והארננו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך.
Judah, more than anyone else in the Torah, changes. The man we see these years later is not what he was then. Then he was prepared to see his brother sold into slavery. Now he is prepared to suffer that faith himself rather than see Benjamin as a slave. As he says to Joseph, "So now please let your servant stay instead of the boy as a slave to my Lord, and may the boy go up with his brothers. For how will I go to my father if the boy is not with me? Let me not see the misery that my father will befall." Genesis 44, 33, 34. It is precise reversal of character. Callousness has been placed with concern. Indifference to his brother's fate, he has been transformed into courage on his behalf. He is willing to suffer what he once inflicted on Joseph, that the same fate shall not befall Benjamin. At this point, Joseph reveals his identity. We know why. Judah has passed the test that Joseph has carefully constructed him, for Joseph wants to know that Judah has changed, and he has. This parable reminds me of an activity that my daughter, Michelle, did with some troubled teens. The teenagers painted ceramic pieces and sold them to donate the proceeds to the nursing home. Like Judah, the teens discovered concern in place of callousness. I'd like this opportunity to say thank you, my heart, filled with longing for family. I miss my parents, my grandparents, who would have liked to have seen me do this today with all my heart. I'm happy to have my daughter Faith here with me today, and my daughter and her family will be viewing this out of state on Zoom. This experience has helped me recognize family is more than just blood relatives. As this B'nai Mitzvah class has all studied together, we've worked hard to create memorable service, and I've found bonds of friendship that will last a lifetime. We continue on page 114. Please rise in body and spirit. Watch for our faith. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Maluto, Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Maluto, Le'olam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Please be seated.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך. ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בהם בשבתך בביתך ובלתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לעוד על ידך וחיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, ופשרתם בפשריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיהם. אני אדוני אלוהיהם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיהם. When justice burns within us like a flaming fire, when love evokes willing sacrifice from us, when, to the last full measure of selfless devotion, we demonstrate our belief in the ultimate triumph of truth and righteousness, then your goodness enters our lives and we can begin to change the world. And then you live in our hearts, and we, through righteousness, behold your presence. Genesis is, top to bottom, about families, and without exception, all of those families are troubled. Often, the issues, though painful, are mundane, like jealousy and favoritism, but there are also truly destructive betrayals. And reconciliations occur, but even when they're warm, afterwards everyone scatters. The only exception that I can think of occurs in this week's Parsha. Its title is Vayigash, which is derived from a very archaic root, nagash. Nagash has two meanings: to approach someone, but also to draw someone close. And it's frequently used to describe moments of physical affection and intimacy between family members, usually parents and children. My aliyah is just 4 verses of this parsha, and only half of a remarkable speech that Joseph makes to the brothers who sold him into slavery years earlier. After reassuring his terrified brothers that his harrowing journey to Egypt was God's doing and not theirs, Joseph implores them to return immediately to Canaan. Once there, they must reveal Joseph's powerful position to their father Jacob, warn Jacob that the famine has only just begun, and insist that the entire clan, every generation, and all of its members come to Egypt immediately to settle in the fertile land of Goshen, where Joseph can sustain and be close to them. This entire exchange between brothers begins well before my section starts, goes on for some time after it ends, and is so beautiful that there's midrash that angels raced in from the heavens so that they could watch the scene play out as it happened. But the point of my 4 verses is that the family is asked to approach so that Joseph can draw them close, and remarkably, all of this eventually happens. I asked what it was about this conflict that was so exceptional that it could end in reunification when none of the others could. Why here and why now? Answers jump out rather quickly. The family is at the threshold of Egypt, and the story is on the threshold of Exodus. If Abraham's descendants had pulled up stakes and split up earlier, perhaps it was allowable because they had remained within the vicinity of Canaan. But this time, the company that settles in Egypt will number only 70, and though they do not yet know it, they are the first diaspora. They are the kernel of Israel, and no one can be left behind. Verse 7, immediately before my section begins, is always translated as, God sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival in the land. But I've learned that the literal translation is, God has sent me ahead of you to place for you a remnant, sha'aret, in the land, a piece of a whole. Verse 11 finds Joseph imploring his brothers to bring their father to Egypt, lest the family become destitute, or at least that is how Tiva Resh is always translated. But Ibn Ezra and Arbarbanel insisted that the true meaning was cut off, in other words, made a remnant. They argued that verses 7 and 11 should be understood as sharing a single metaphor and message. There has to be an ingathering, precisely because Jacob's children are at Egypt's doorstep. Without Egypt, there is no reunification. Leaving Eretz Yisrael makes Am Yisrael happen. We're told to read these stories yearly, to immerse ourselves in them and experience them. So it's always instructive to ask ourselves what exactly we are meant to be experiencing in any given week. Every spring during the Seder, we revisit the flight from Egypt so that we can imagine our own deliverance. And I've always found it profound that no matter how the lunar calendar arranges itself every year, American Jews will always be engrossed in Exodus for the entirety of Black History Month. There is no better time to think about diaspora and dispossession in all of its forms. So this week is Vayigash. It is always read during the shortest days of winter, mid-December to early January. And in it, we have these people who are, as I said, on the threshold of so much, including ludicrous prosperity, but also eventually tremendous suffering and being pared to the bone. Joseph may think he knows everything that's coming, but his brothers do not. And Joseph is so wrong anyway in the long run. He will go on to make his mistakes, which sounds very much like us. And perhaps we should ask ourselves who we would gather in at this moment in time. My most heartfelt thanks to my teachers, my classmates, and my family. Oh. Jill.
We continue on page 127, reading responsively. Our fathers and mothers prayed, each through their own experience of God, each through their own visions, which we have come to share. Isaac, meditating alone in the field, lifted his eyes to find love. Rebekah asked for the ability to discern God's call. We as they seek God's presence. Baruch atah Adonai Magin Avraham v'Yizrat Sarah. We told you the lad could not leave his father. If he left him, his father would die. You replied, if your youngest brother does not come with you, you shall not see my face again. The first time I read my Torah verses, I quickly penned a Devar Torah about reconciliation, an overarching theme for today's Parshat. I sent my first draft to trusted critics, confident their tweaks and edits would be minor. I was wrong. I decided to ruminate on the verses once again. After consideration, I realized I needed to verify whether the verb to see held the same meaning in Hebrew as it did in English. At that point, my interpretation became more nuanced. Was see a means of deciphering the truth because the integrity of the brothers was in question? Was Joseph playing negative ancestral scripts that led him to mistrust his brother Judah? Perhaps Joseph needed to believe his eyes, to see Benjamin in order to trust. And can true reconciliation be achieved without trust? Trust can be a slippery slope. Identifying trusted sources in an interdependent global world where one is pummeled by new information every nanosecond requires more effort and discretion than it did before the digital age. Trust, or the lack thereof, is an epidemic in our society. Our once most trusted sources are questioned daily. Each of us has our own sieve to filter our information assault. Trust may be given quickly, but it is more often earned over a period of time. For those who may disagree with this premise, one merely needs to look at the nation's adoption of the COVID vaccine. Our information sources are under constant scrutiny. When Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, appeared on screen holding back tears and informed the world President Kennedy was dead, no one questioned his veracity. Conspiracy theories were limited to assassination plots. The world trusted its eyes as it viewed history unfolding. What does this have to do with the Torah verses? Trust. Whether these verses are about reconciliation, trust, or merely a last test for the brothers will be discussed for generations. My hope is a few of those discussions might occur here at Temple Israel. One reason I was drawn to Temple Israel was its commitment to lifelong learning. I was raised a secular Jew who in my late 60s found myself isolated, suffering from clinical depression. I had little interest in life and mistakenly believed my identity was attributable and inseparable from my successful professional career. After retiring prematurely, I found myself coping with more debilitating health issues. I didn't just nest. I put myself in an impenetrable cage. At my low point, I made a mental inventory and listed those things I loved about my job and what I missed most. A few days before Rosh Hashanah, I found myself on Mark Dresner's porch, the site of many important discussions. I casually asked about High Holy Day services. Surprisingly, the next day I met Charmaine, completed a membership application, and as they say, the rest is history. I joined to share a common purpose with those who held shared values. I joined to work with others to assist those in need. I joined to once again make learning part of my daily routine. And I joined to help me emerge from my pattern of isolation. I found so much more. Trust became less ephemeral. At Temple Israel, I found and treasure love from friends who will be in my life forever. I've expanded the catalog of causes I choose to support through the Temple's commitment to social action. I've banded with others in a purposeful team and a wide range of activities. I've been moved by our rituals and the majesty of our celebrations. I've played with friends whose diversity mirrors my pre-temple life. And I've renewed the learning habit as witnessed today. I'd like to say it was my 70th birthday wisdom that postponed my choice to pursue bat mitzvah. But my reasons were an ever-moving target. There's no question, however, that today would not have been possible without the support of many, most especially my wonderful classmates, the dynamic duo of Rabbi Loving and Janet Liss, our fabulous clergy, and my adopted brothers, Matt Davis and Mark Dresner. Thank you. All of you have led me to embrace today as a family affair. Maybe that's all Joseph wanted, trust and family. Both of us found both. Ani habita, I'm home.
We continue on page 124. Please rise in body or in spirit. Adonai, Sefer Tifta, Ufi Agilti Latecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, melech
hayot hakol. Baruch atah Adonai mechayeh hakol.
Let us sanctify your name on earth, as it is sanctified in the heavens above. As it is written by your prophet, Holy, holy, holy is Adonai Tzevaot. God's presence fills the whole earth. Nikadesh, Kadesh, Nikadesh et Shimcha ba'olam, Nikadesh et Shimcha ba'olam, Geshem shemakdishim oto, Mishmei marom, Kakatuv vayad nevieh, Ekave karaseh else vehamar. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzevaot, Melech haaretz kevodo. Adir, Adirenu, Adir, Adirenu, Adonai, Adonai, Adonenu, Ma'adir, Ma'adir, Shimcha b'haaretz, Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. Echad hu Eloheinu, hu Avinu, hu Malkeinu, hu Moshienu, Vehu yashmienu, Vehu yashmienu, Vehu yashmienu, Barachamav, Barachamav le'nei chochai, Imloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Zion, L'dor v'dor, Alleluia. Please be seated. To all generations we will declare your greatness, and for all eternity proclaim your holiness. Your praise, O God, shall never depart from our lips. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh.
Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, agid god lecha, uhul netzach netzachim, uhul netzach netzachim, kedushat chanakdish, ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, nagid god lecha, uhul netzach netzachim, uhul netzach netzachim, kedushatcha nakdish, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד כי אל מלך גדול כי אל מלך גדול הקדוש לדור ודור, לדור ודור, נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש. ברוך אתה אדוני
My Torah portion is about Joseph and how he meets up with his brothers, and then he forgives his brothers for selling him into slavery. This portion does not talk about what led Joseph to forgive his brothers, only that he did. It is not always clear why we decide to forgive someone. Some people have a hard time forgiving someone who has done terrible things to them, like Joseph's brothers did to him. I'm sure it was not an easy thing to forgive, but he did it. And in doing so, he was able to have a relationship with them. Personally, I know this internal struggle that comes with forgiving someone in the way that Joseph did. My mother and I did not always get along, and it wasn't simply because of the mother-daughter dynamics that sometimes happen when growing up. My mother did a lot of terrible things. When it came to raising me, neglect and abuse being two of the worst. And I held on to a lot of anger against her because of that. Years of being angry, in fact. So much so that it became a part of my identity. In the last few years of her life, I was still angry, still holding on to that anger like a fire that was keeping me alive. We'd started to have a better relationship, but I wasn't yet ready to forgive her. Forgiveness came when I had no other choice but to forgive her. As she lay dying, I knew that it had to be done, to be said aloud for her to be able to pass over. I knew she was waiting to hear those words before she let go, and I knew I needed to say them. In that moment when I said I forgave her, they felt more like empty words. I wanted to forgive her, I did. But true forgiveness wouldn't come for a few more months when I was ready to finally let go because she wasn't there to be angry at anymore. It was not easy to forgive her, but like Joseph with his brothers, it needed to be done to move forward. I don't regret forgiving her, but I do regret the time I wasted in being so angry. According to Jewish law, a person may not expect forgiveness unless they undergo a sincere effort to perform teshuvah, meaning repentance or return. It is likely that Joseph's brothers did not expect to be forgiven, nor did they ask for it. Teshuvah may have been completed when they were in the same situation but acted differently. And we are also taught that forgiving is a mitzvah. And I think forgiveness isn't always just needed by the person who did something wrong. Sometimes the person who has been wronged needs to forgive in order to move forward and to grow. And that's what I think the real lesson is here. Forgiveness is a two-way street in the sense that both parties need forgiveness. One to do the forgiving and the other to be forgiven in order to move forward or let go. Sometimes we need to practice the words before they have real meaning, but in the end, forgiveness really is a mitzvah.
Now we're going to sing together Vishamru. I'm not sure what page it's on. If someone has. What page? And we have a custom here. When we sing Vishamru together, we all kind of jump up and lift up our hands on the word et. And it comes up a lot. And I won't practice it because I think it happens enough, you'll get it. So just remember, et, like that, okay? Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. V'ni uvein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam, oti leolam, oti leolam. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi shavat vayinafash, shavat vayinafash, shavat vayinafash. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam.
We continue on page 137. On this holy Shabbat, may we draw nearer to life, to peace, and to joy. May we find true rest, holiness in our deeds, worth in our study of Torah. Let us feed on the love of goodness. Let us drink from the love of goodness, restrain our thirst for excess, and cleanse our hearts to serve life well. On this holy Shabbat, may we draw nearer in life, in peace and in joy. Baruch avatcha Yisrael. Sorry, guys, I can't see. Sha'otcha levatcha b'yira na avod. Ritzeh Adonai Eloheinu ba'achava Yisrael. U'tefilatam ba'achava ta'kabel. U'tki laratzon tamecha. Avodat Yisrael amecha. Baruch atah Adonai she'okka levadka b'yira na avod.
The first time I came to Temple Israel, I wasn't seeking religion. On some level, I was seeking connection. And the book club fit my need for intellectual stimulation. Then someone asked me the question, "Are you Jewish?" I feared I'd be told to leave because at this time I wasn't Jewish yet. But instead, I was encouraged to participate. My Torah portion talks about how, despite his fear, Judah walked right up to Joseph and said, "No, no," to the man who had power to have him executed on the spot for his defiance. That took a lot of guts. We all know that when facing challenges, there is always an element of fear, and we can either let it paralyze us or we can take action despite it. Although it's not always been easy, most often I have not allowed it to incapacitate me. Taking action leads to results. Judah didn't know where his courage would lead. He had no idea he was speaking to his long-lost brother, who everyone thought was dead. Judah was simply doing all he could to protect his father, as he knew it was up to him. If Judah hadn't had the courage to take a huge risk to speak up, his family would never have been reunited. Confronting unjust rules and laws and challenging unfairness has always played a big part in my entelechy, a Greek word for soul's purpose. In 1971, I challenged Los Angeles Trade Tech's practice of not allowing women to take auto mechanic classes, and after I won that case, 4 women were admitted to the next semester, and I rebuilt a Ford 289 engine and C6 transmission. Soon afterward, I was recruited by the Southern California Gas Company to be their first woman auto mechanic. I received positive evaluations on my work. Yet a few days before my probationary period was over, I was fired for incompetence. I saw it for what it was, and 5.5 months later, I won the sexual discrimination suit. Even though I was often afraid to take risks, hitchhiking across the country, racing motorcycles, parachuting out of Army helicopters, I didn't let my fear stop me. Taking physical risks was exciting. Allowing myself to be vulnerable was a different story. It took me years to take that risk. Self-revelation required my greatest courage. Like Joseph Campbell writes in The Hero's Journey, metaphorically speaking, the slaying of dragons is an inside job. Judah was very protective of his aging father, as I am of the vulnerable and those I love. Sometimes it's easier to protect others than to protect oneself. Before becoming Jewish, I had no prior religious affiliation, so I don't see myself as having converted. Someone I love once told me that Rabbi Kelter never referred to people as converts. Rather, he said that they become Jewish. He believed that converting meant leaving behind who they were, but becoming Jewish meant that they came to Judaism intact, bringing with them their whole selves. When I became Jewish, I did not give up any part of who I was, and instead expanded into a more meaningful life. At my Bet Din, I was asked how I felt about Israel. That was easy to answer because I already had a spiritual connection, which I gleaned from learning about the struggles Israel had in forming a nation. At the mikveh, I had a profound experience of acceptance, which reinforced my connection to Judaism. Along with personal acceptance, there was a sense of being welcomed into the larger Jewish community. In my Torah portion, Judah risked his own life by standing his ground for what he believed. Protecting the father he loved speaks to me not only on a personal level, but reminds me of the 3 most important aspects of being Jewish: belonging to and strengthening community, living one's ethics and values, which includes tikkun olam, and being allowed, even encouraged, to question. As I learn and engage, I look forward to continuing on the path of becoming and deepening my connection to Judaism and our Jewish community. Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam, Ki Atahu Melech Adon Lechol HaShalom, B'tov Binyecha Levarech et Amcha Yisrael, B'chol et Uv'chol Sha'a B'shalomecha, Baruch Ata Adonai HaMevarech et Amo Yisrael B'Shalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki Atahu Melech Adon Lechol HaShalom. 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 Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov b'einecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael. 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 B'chol et u'chol shah. B'chol et u'chol shah. B'chol et u'chol shah. B'shlomecha. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Baruch Ata Adonai HaMevarech et Amo Yisrael. HaMevarech et Amo Yisrael. B'Shalom. Grant abundant peace to Israel, your people forever, for you are the sovereign God of all peace. May it be pleasing to you to bless your people Israel in every season and every moment with your peace. Mile is sections 24 through 29, and it says, "We went to your servant our father and told him what you said. When our father told us to go back and get some food, we replied, 'We cannot go. We can only go back if your youngest brother is with us. If he is not with us, we cannot even see the man in charge.' Your servant our father said, 'You know that my wife Rachel bore me 2 sons. One has already left me, and I assume that he was torn to pieces by wild animals. I've seen nothing of him until now. Now you want to take this one from me too? If something were to happen to him, you would have brought my white head down to the grave in evil misery.'" There are many important moments in the series of events that unfold in this story, but perhaps the most poignant to me is in the passage when Jacob displays a hint of doubt, when he says he assumes his son was torn to pieces. He then goes on to envision what would happen to him if he were to lose his other son. As I was ruminating about this, it occurred to me that it was not the loss of Jacob's son that was the issue, but where his mind took him at the idea of the loss. About 6 years ago, I lost sight in my left eye. The doctors informed me that due to the extent of my injuries, I could lose sight in my right eye as well. Like Jacob, my mind whirled with the thought of what my future would be with such a devastating loss. At some point, I stopped and took pause of the situation. I still had sight in one eye. Until, and unless I lost sight in the other eye, why fear what might happen? As it happens, this is a Jewish response to suffering. Something good can come from, or be made from, every challenge or disappointment or heartache life throws at us. It's making lemonade out of lemons. So the next time we think life is difficult, let us consider our patriarch Jacob and how positive thinking could have changed his mindset. As we experience pain and suffering, let us not become forever mired in it. We continue in silent prayer.
Ki heim hayenu ve'orech yameinu uvahem negeh yomam v'layla.
We now continue our service with Seder Kriyat Torah, the service for taking out and reading of the Torah. We give in this service each of our bar and bat mitzvah the opportunity to read from these sacred scriptures, taking their places as bar and bat mitzvah in our community. Now, not right away, but when we do get to the part of our service where we are bringing the Torah around, because of the day and age that we are in this particular moment, I do invite each of us to celebrate and offer our Mazel Tov, but in a way that doesn't include, as we would normally, hugging one another. But there are other ways, I assure us, to share that same love, to say Mazel Tov, congratulations, to offer some loving words. And if it is your custom, I invite you as well to place your hand on the Torah and to kiss your hand as it touches the Torah, as it has touched the Torah as well. Although, of course, to remain masked in that as well. Well, I now would like to invite up our B'nai Mitzvah to the front of our sanctuary. The rest of the congregation I'd like to invite to please rise in body or in spirit.
Ein kamoha v'Elohim Adonai, ve'ein k'ma'asecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'ador. Adonai malach, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch le'olam vad. Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Av ha'rachamim hitiv avertzonecha et Zion. Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim, Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim. Ki v'cha levad batachnu, Melech eram v'nisa Adon olamim. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, u'devar Adonai mirushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadlu l'Adonai iti, u'nuromem Shemo yachdav. Lecha Adonai hagedula, v'hagevura, v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach, v'hahod. Ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz, ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz.
על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים העולם עומד, על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים העולם עומד, על התורה ועל העבודה ועל גמילות חסדים, על התורה ועל העבודה ועל גמילות חסדים.
Please be seated. For our very first Aliyah, we call up Kim DeSales to read from our Torah as she is finding her place. Give her just a moment to find her place in our Torah. So too does she find her place in our community.
Nala Amod, Ariel Bat Abraham de Sarah La Liah HaTorah. We begin with the blessing before the Torah reading.
Baruch et Adonai Havorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamarach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Havorach Leolam Vayed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Vaigash elav Yehuda vayomer, Bi Adoni yedaberna, avdaha devar ba'ozne Adoni, va'al yahar ap ba'avdeha, bi ki hamocha kafar o, Adoni sha'al av avadecha lemor, hayesh lahem av ach Lamor el Adoni, Va'abiv Adoni yesh lanu Av Zakein, Vayeled Zekunim Katan, Va'ahiv mate, Vivater hu levado, La'imo ve'aviv ahevo. Vatomer el avadecha horiduhu elai, Vasima ani elav.
We continue with the English translation of that very same reading.
Judah walked up to Joseph and said, "Please, Your Highness, let me say something to you personally. Do not be angry with me, even though you are just like Pharaoh. You asked if we still had a father or another brother. We told you we have a father who is very old, and the youngest brother is a child of his old age. He had a brother who died, and thus he is the only one of his mother's children still alive. His father loves him. You said to us, 'Bring him to me, so that I might set my eyes upon him.'"
We continue with the blessing after the Torah reading.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'hayei olam natah b'tohenu Baruch atah Adonai, noten ha-Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
For our second aliyah, we call up Jill Fisher-Granite.
Nala Amod, Gili Bat Raphael, Vechana Lalia HaTorah.
Baruch et Adonai Hamavarach.
Baruch Adonai Havarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamavarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher barakabanu mikol hamim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen.
V'nomer el Avdoni lo yuchal hanar la'azav et aviv va'azav et aviv va'met va'tomer el avodecha im lo yered ahichem hakaton etchem lo tosifun lirod panai. We told you the lad cannot leave his father. If he left him, his father would die. You replied, if your youngest brother does not come with you, you shall not see my face again. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'kaye olam nata batokenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen. Shekoach. Yes, Shekoach. That is the traditional thing to say after someone reads from Torah and reads from Torah so beautifully. I have a feeling we may be offering that blessing a little more. Yashar Koach, the blessing after someone reads from Torah. For our next aliyah, I'd like to call up Darren.
Nala Amod, David Faisal Ben Vofer, Esther Sarah Lalia HaTorah.
Take your other hand, please. Yod on the word.
I had it on the word. You picked it up. Okay. Oh, right here. There we go.
Thank you.
Baruch hu et Adonai havarach.
Baruch Adonai Havarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai havarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech halom, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen.
Vayehi ki alinu el avdecha avi, v'naged lo et divrei Adoni, vayomer avinu shivru lanu ma'et achel, v'nomer lo nuchel laredet shivru lanu im yesh anachnu hakaton atanu v'yeradnu ki lo nechal laredet im pnei chayesh v'hachaton enenu akatenu v'yomer avdecha panai avi alenu atem yiratem ki shenaim yaldal li ashti vayetze hayachad meati vayomer ach tarof toraf velo reativ ad henu ukachtem gam et ze mayim panai v'charahu ason v'huradatem et shivrei v'ra'aha she'ula. We went to your servant, our father, and told him what you said. When your father told us to go back and get some food, we replied, "We cannot go. We can only go back if your youngest brother is with us. If he's not with us, we cannot even see the man in charge." Your servant, our father, said, "You know that my wife, Rachel, bore me 2 sons. One has already left me, and I assume that he was torn to pieces by wild animals. I've seen nothing of him until now. Now you want to take this one from me too? If something were to happen to him, you will have brought my white head down to the grave in evil misery." Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet, v'chayei olam nata v'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
For our 4th Aliyah, we have the pleasure of calling up Lydia Pinto.
Nala amod sivia bat emet laliyah haTorah.
I'll put it, yeah, I'll hold it for you. Thank you. Good, hold it back here. Shh. Thank you. Thank you. Take your other hand, please. Sorry. It's okay. You do great.
Baruch et Adonai Amvorach.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
ואתה כבואי אל עבדך, אבי והנער, איננו איתנו ונפשו כשורה ונפשו. והיה כראותו כי אין הנער ומת, והורידו עבדיך את שיבת עבדך אבינו ביגון שאולה. כי עבדך ערב את הנער, מאם אבי לאמור אם לא, אבינו אליך וחטאתי לאבי כל העמים. And now, when I come to your servant, our father, the lad will not be with us. His soul is bound up with the lad's soul. When he sees that the lad is not there, he will die. I will have brought your servant, our father's white head, down to the grave in misery. Besides, I offered myself to my father as a guarantee for the lad, and I said, if I do not bring back him to you, I will have sinned to my father for all time. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet, v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. For our 5th Aliyah, we call up Harriet Reed.
Nala amod Chana Leah bat Fegel Ruchel leYaakov Yitzchak laliyah haTorah.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorah.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorah le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher Bacha Banu Mikol Bahamim, Vanatan Lanu et Torato, Baruch Atah Adonai, Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Va'ata Yeshevnach Avdacha Tahat Hana'ar Eved Ladoni Vahana'ar Yal Im Echav Ki Ayach Ech Echalaha Elahavi Vahanar Ananu Iti Pen Ech Vara Asher Yemtza et Avi. So now let me remain as your slave in the place of the lad. Let the lad go back with his brothers, for how can I go back to my father if the lad is not with me? I cannot bear to see the evil misery that my father would suffer. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, yachaye olam natabito chenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen. Yasher koach. You did it.
For our next aliyah, we call up Morgan J. East.
Nala amod galit bat Abraham v'Sara l'aliyah haTorah.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Velo yachol Yosef lahitapech lachol hanitzavim alav vayikra hotziu chol ish me'alai velo amadish ito b'hitvadai Yosef elechav vayiten et kolo bivchi vayishmeu Mitzrayim Vayishma beit Paro, Vayomer Yosef elechav, Ani Yosef, ha'od avichai, Velo yachlu echav la'anot oto, ki nivchalu mipanav, Vayomer Yosef elechav, Geshuna elai, Vayigashu, Vayomer ani Yosef achichem shemechartem oti Mitzrayma ve'ata al teatzevu ve'al yichar be'einechem ki michartem oti hena ki limichya shelachani Elohim lifnechem ki zeh Shenatayim ha'arav bekerev ha'aretz ve'od chemei shanim asher en charish ve'katzir vayishlacheni Elohim lifnechem lashum lachem she'arit ba'aretz u'hachayod lachem lifleta gedolah. Joseph could not hold in his emotions. Since all his attendants were present, he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." Thus no one was with him when Joseph revealed himself to his brothers. He began to weep with such loud sobs that the Egyptians could hear it. The news of these strange happenings reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were so startled they could not respond. "Please come to me," said Joseph to his brothers. When they came closer, he said, "I am Joseph, your brother. You sold me to Egypt. Now don't worry or feel guilty because you sold me. Look, God has sent me ahead of you to save lives. There has been a famine in the area for 2 years, and for another 5 years there will be no plowing or harvest. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure that you survive in the land and to keep you alive through extraordinary means. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Yasher koach.
For our 7th and final aliyah, we call up Rachel Kelson.
Nala amod Rivka bat Sarah imnenu laliyah haTorah.
Okay. All right. Yes. Okay. Gotcha. Do the blessing first. Wait, where am I? Find it. Thank you. Okay, you can do the blessing. I got it. Okay. Baruch et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Ve'atah lo atem shelachtem oti heina ki ha-Elohim vaisimeni le'av lefaro ul adon lechol beito umoshel bechol eretz Mitzrayim maharu va'alu elavi va'amartem elav ko amar bincha Yosef semani Elohim le'adon lechol Mitzrayim reda elai al ta'amod ve'ashavta ve'eretz Goshen ve'chayita karov elai ata uvanecha uvnei vanecha vetzoncha uvkarcha vechol asher lach vechilchalti otacha sham ki od chamesh shanim otacha pentivaresh ata uvetcha vechol asher lach. Now it is not you who sent me here, but God. God has made me Pharaoh's vizier, director of his entire government and dictator of all Egypt. Hurry, go back to my father and give him the message. Joseph says, God has made me master of all Egypt. Come to me without delay. You will be able to settle in the Goshen district and be close to me. You, your children, your grandchildren, your sheep, your cattle, and all that you own. I will fully provide for you there, since there will still be another 5 years of famine. I do not want you to become destitute, along with your family and all that is yours. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Yasher
koach. Yasher koach.
Our B'nai Mitzvah. Well, as we continue this celebration, we now return our Torah to the Ark. I'd like to invite all of us to rise in body or in spirit.
HaTorah, וזאת התורה, וזאת התורה אשר שם משה, וזאת התורה אשר שם משה, לפני בני ישראל, לפני בני ישראל. וזאת התורה, וזאת התורה, וזאת התורה, וזאת התורה, וזאת התורה, וזאת התורה, על פי אדוני ביד משה. לילה 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 Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuvah Chadish, Chadish Yameinu Chadish Yameinu
Please be seated. We continue now with our Haftorah reading, and so I'd like to call up Darren and Morgan to continue leading us in these sacred words, this time from our Nach, the other sections of our Bible.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech halom asher bachar b'nevim tovim v'ratzava divreihem hanebarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo, u'v'nevi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek.
Ve'avdi David melech aleichem, ve'ruach echad yeh lechulam, u'mishpatai yelechu, ve'chukotai yishmeru, ve'ya'asu otam, vayashvu al haaretz, asher natati lavdi liYaakov, asher yashvuvat avotechem, vayashvu aleha. Hema uvnehem, uvnei v'neihem, adolam, v'David avdi, nasi lahem leolam, charati lahem, berit shalom, berit olam yeh otam. Benatatim, behir beiti, otam. Benatati et mikdashi, betocham leolam. V'haya mishkani alehem. V'hayiti lahem leelohim. Behema yihu li la'am. V'yadu hagoyim ki ani Adonai. Mikadesh et Yisrael biyod mikdashi betocham leolam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zor kol halamim, sadik bechol hadorot, ha'el haneman, ha'omer v'yoseh, u'mimedaber u'mikayem, shebechol devara emet v'tzedek. Al haTorah ve'al havodah ve'al hanaim ve'al yom haShabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu lichudisha u'limnucha likuvod u'kifnei aret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'mivarechim otach Yitbarich Shimcha Befi Kol Chai Talmid Leolam Vaed Baruch Atah Adonai Michadesh HaShabbat.
Well, Yasher Koach, again, I think there's one and only one thing to say to a group of people who have led us in prayer and in taking the words of our tradition and bringing them to life in such a beautiful way. And that is to say, let's again say Yasher Koach, which means what a wonderful job. We are inspired by the words that you're saying. I invite us on the count of three to say Yasher Koach. 1, 2, 3. Yasher Koach. Well done, everyone. Well done. We want to continue to celebrate this moment with you and to offer our appreciation and inspiration that you have given to each of us. And so it is now my absolute joy to call up our president, Mark Dressner, as he offers some words and a presentation to you as well.
I'll say something then kol hakavod, which means all the honor. I planned what I wanted to say, but you never know how things are going to hit you. For some of us, this is our second B'nai Mitzvah of the day, and I cry at every bar mitzvah. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to cry at the second one in the day. And you guys, oh man, I cried about 4 or 5 times. So just blew me away. Anyway, I wonder how you're feeling now that you've reached Jewish adulthood and you could leave your wild teen years behind. I thought about the process that you've all gone through. And, I'm thinking, and I was really just thinking about Kim too. It all starts with all of a sudden there's 22 squiggly little markings that you don't even know what they mean. And you learn how to pronounce each and every one of them, and you get that down, and then you put them together, and all of a sudden you could say shalom or Shabbat. It becomes a word. And then those words come together, and they're a sentence, and you start doing prayers, and you start reading Torah, and things start making sense to you, and you start interpreting them, and discussing them together and introspecting about them, and the process you've gone through, which is usually 2 years, but most people don't have a viral pandemic in the middle of your class. So I think it's been 3 or 4 years for all of you. But just such an amazing process you went through from those 22 squiggly lines at the beginning that meant nothing to a lot of you. So anyway, and not only does it mean so much to you, but this really means a lot to the community. I think everyone here feels so special. I think for all our congregants who missed this afternoon, they missed a really incredible afternoon. And, it doesn't matter for us whether you're 13 or whether you're maybe some kind of multiple of 13. What you've done for us, the Jewish people, to strengthen us today is just so very important. So really express how wonderful this has been. And I've got to see Morgan's twice, which is really cool. And on behalf of the temple, it has not arrived yet, but there is a newly published social action commentary on the Torah, where each section, there's a little, how each section could drive you to social action and how that works. Just was published within the last 2 weeks, and that should be arriving for everybody. And on behalf of the temple, will be receiving that when they arrive. So, Yasher Koach to all of you. Thank you so much.
Yasher Koach, and thank you, Mark. I wonder if I could ask our B'nai Mitzvah to come up again. Stand. We practiced this, so if you could stand, again, as we were before. And I hope everyone here will forgive me for placing my back to you, but I want to face our B'nai Mitzvah class. Each of you spent years learning for this moment. Each of you took the time to learn in class, to bring those squiggly lines, as you mentioned, Mark, into focus. And today, when you chose what you wanted to teach each and every one of us, the words were deeply personal. I remember meeting with each one of you and saying, so what do you want to tell us about what is in this Torah portion? And each of you said, there's something that speaks to me. Do you think I could share a little bit of my story here? Well, I don't think that there is anything more closer to what we draw from these words than that exactly. We learn together, not to uncover some set of information, not to come up with a solution to a particular set of math algorithms. If anybody is strong in math, you can give me a better word than that. We learn because it brings us out into the world. And I think there's another thing that we do as well when we learn and we draw nearer to one another. You've just read to us from the Torah and from the prophets and the writings. The next step, I'm being a little bit away here, the next step in the rabbinic literature is the Pirkei Avot and the Talmud. And in one of the earliest texts, it says, when two people sit together and they learn, there is a holy presence. I'd like to suggest that also when two people sit and they learn together, they draw nearer to one another. And so just in the same way as each of you has shared with us your voice and what you see in this Torah portion, you've also shown us the beauty of what it means to come together as a community. This is a microcosm of the greater community, and each of you have reflected that not just in your teachings, not just in the way that you share yourselves with us, but in the way that you have shared yourselves with one another. And so, this is my invitation to each of you. Something you probably don't want to hear. This is just the beginning. You've worked so hard to come to this place, and I do hope that you feel deeply proud of what you have accomplished. And know that we continue on, that there is so much more to learn. And becoming an adult, as I'm telling each of you what it means to be an adult, right? You know what it means to be an adult. You're standing here being, actualizing that exact thing. Each of you are actualizing what it means to be an adult because you are standing together. And so as you continue your learning, as you journey forth, I invite you to stay together as one small community, as one chosen family. There's much more to learn. Let's go and learn it. We have a blessing for you this afternoon, and so I'd like to offer these sacred words that come to us from our tradition, passed down the generations. Today, these words are for each of you.
Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha.
May God bless you and keep you.
Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka.
May God's face be turned toward you in graciousness.
Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom.
May God always watch over you, and may you be blessed with that greatest of gifts, that gift of peace. I invite us together to say, Amen. Mazel tov to each of you. Mazel tov and congratulations. We continue our service now with the words that we find on page 282. Page 282, with the words of Aleinu, I'd like to invite us to please rise in body or in spirit.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Please be seated. We learn many things from our tradition, and one of them is the way that the past, the present, and the future can be intimately intertwined. And so at this point in our service, we draw into our hearts and minds those who are very much a part of today and tomorrow, but are no longer with us because they have passed away. And so it is with blessing that we draw in the memories, especially this morning, of Helen Fisher, Merle Fisher, Mike Gillespie and Francis Ruth Green, Jacob Isaac Green and Rose Green, Hyman Green and Wan Hammer, Mina Katz and Albert Katz, Ben Kelson and Esther Kelson, Carol Grucci and Julie Arms Meeks, Elise Pinto and Ernest Pinto. Those near to the hearts of our B'nai Mitzvah class. And additionally, our hearts go out to those who who are observing Shiva and Shloshim, the 7 days and the 30 days after the death of someone near to them. And so we think of those near to Mark Hardy. We think of Heidi and Maxine and Madeline, Jesse and Kevin. We think of those near to Marcel Solomon. We think of Carol. And we think of those near to Rhoda Priestman. We think of Heather. And we additionally mark the yard site, the anniversary of the death of Narciso Bautista, John Edelstein, Lee Firstman, Milton Friedman, Alice Gerstmann, Minnie Glickman, Ida Golden, Max Granite, Bud Caney, Dorothy Langlow, Dorothy Levy, Robert Locke, Edith Roslinski, Michael Rosen, Sarah Ross, Sarah Schaefer, William Schnee, Lee Siegel, Robert Chafton, Alan Sperling, Norman Stern, Carolyn Wolk. If you are joining us online, and there is anyone that you are thinking of this particular Shabbat, I invite you to place their names in the chat now. And if you are here with us in our sanctuary, and there is someone that you are thinking of, I invite you to share their name aloud as my eyes pass across our sanctuary. We additionally think of Anne Haley. I'd like now to invite all of us to turn to page 294 of our prayer books as we offer these words of Mourner's Kaddish and to rise together in love and in solidarity as we offer these traditional words of mourning. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, B'yalma divrach hirtei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael, b'agala u'bizman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam olmei maya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudisha barichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, Tamiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'asei shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru, amen. Zichronam livracha, may the memories of those near to us always be a source of blessing. I invite us together to say, amen. Cantor, what is our closing song for our service?
Oh, say shalom.
Oh, say shalom.
Oh.
Oh, say shalom. Well, let's join together. We have a nechemta, as they say, a positive note right there at the end of our prayer that we just offered, reminding us of the joy, the sweetness, the light in our community. And for some of us, we are going to choose to place our arms around the person next to us. Of course, we all have our individual choices for that. And so, but if you would like, if you happen to be celebrating an adult bat mitzvah today, I invite you to place your arms around the person next to you. Let's join together in song.
Oh, say shalom b'bromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, amen. ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. Say shalom b'bromah. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imru, imru, amen. Shabbat shalom, hey, Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom.
You know, I tell our leaders that all you have to do is come up and start the prayer, and they will jump in. That this is, we are leading together. So before we finish our time together this evening, since we are together this evening, we thought we might bless this transition. Not just the transition of Shabbat and the week, but also this transition from one moment of adulthood to another, as each of you celebrate and take the sweetness of this day into the many, many days together of your continued learning and lives. And so I'd like to invite all of our adult B'nai Mitzvah to come on up and help us in the leading. There's not much you have to do. This is, come on up.
It's very scary. Yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 ya la lai ya la lai yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 ya la lai ya la lai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai lai yai lai lai yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai lai yai lai lai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei vesamim borei minei vesamim yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai lai yai lai lai Yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai lai yai lai lai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
Yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 ya la lai ya la lai yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 ya la lai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol hamavdil ben kodesh lechol.
Guess I'll take a sip. Are you ready? Sure. So the next step is to place it in the wine. Do it together. Sure. Yeah. And it's even better in the microphone. You can hear it when you're ready. We can do it together.
It's hot.
Yeah. Sorry. Wasn't that loud?
No.
Sizzle.
Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol chatoteinu yimchol zareinu v'chaspenu yardecha chol v'hachochavim balayla Shavua tov, 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 Shavua tov. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Bimhera veyamenu yavo eleinu Imashiach ben David Imashiach ben David Eliyahu Hanavi Eliyahu Hatishbi Eliyahu 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 Hagiladi. Mazel tov, Shavua tov. Shavua tov. Yay.
Amen, amen. Amen, amen.
She's so pretty. Shavua tov.
This is amen, amen.
Two in one day, it was
Because of moments like this and because of your heart here. Amen, amen. Amen, amen.
When you were standing up here with, and I just was remembering how now we're in this role.
Congratulations all around.
Yeah, exactly.
3 years ago, 4 years ago, this January. Wasn't it in January?
Yes, 2018.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yeah. It feels like a lot longer, doesn't it? I mean, a lot of life has passed in
A
that.
lot has happened.
Yeah.
Happy anniversary.